This next drill is a half kneel, hip flexor or quad stretch in PAIL's rails. So what we're going to do is we're going to essentially have something that we're comfortable kneeling on that gives a nice bit of cushioning underneath the kneecap joint. I'm going to start off in 90-degree angles. So I'm going to have about a square here and about a square there. And to make sure that I get a good stretch through the front of my hip, not necessarily through my hip ligaments, but more through the muscles of your hip flexors, I'm going to tuck my tail, and that's what should initiate some broad tension through your thigh. The other thing I'm going to do is make sure that my toes are tucked up underneath me. If for whatever reason that is uncomfortable, feel free to point them, and that's an option that you can build into the stretch. For those of you that are comfortable with them tucked, we'll establish that position, we'll establish our tail tuck, and then we have options in terms of how to increase the length of the stretch through your thigh. For those of you who are really flexible, you might have to offer something else at the back of your foot to put your foot up on, so I'll show you those now. The first option would be essentially something like a foam roller up on a pillow, and you could start to stack those pillows up to build it up progressively. Then I'm going to get back down into position, make sure I'm close enough that I can get not necessarily my foot, that'll feel uncomfortable on my ankle joint, so more so the end of my shin against whatever I'm using as a little lift at the back. And you'll see that that's going to start to bend my knee more, which will stretch my quad more. For those of you who are really flexible, you might want to go for what's known as kind of a classic couch stretch. You have a chair or something like a couch behind you. You get down in position, throw that same portion of your shin up on the chair, and then be upright. What you'll see in this position is that that requires me to have such a bend in my knee that I can touch my heel to my butt. One thing that many individuals experience is that's such an aggressive stretch that makes their back arch, and we want to avoid that. So if you're pretty close to this being a good stretch for you, but you want to take a little bit off of it, I encourage you to essentially shift some of your weight forward to allow that thigh bone to come forward, and you'll essentially support yourself with your elbow on your knee. At that point, after you've established whatever stretch position is most comfortable for you, we're going to go through our PAIL's rails. You would, of course, held this stretch for about 30 seconds to a minute, just getting used to it through some deep breathing. Then I'm going to act like I've got that same scale we always use underneath this back shin. I'm going to keep my tail tucked. I'm going to start to lightly press down into the scale. As I do so, I want to make sure that my kneecap joint feels comfortable. If you need to make any adjustments in your angles or positions to make it more comfortable, that's okay. And I'm going to then continue to gradually ramp up my pressure at the back to what we'll call our greatest, safest effort, where I should feel my hip flexor and my quad working quite strong. I'll hold that tension for 10 seconds, then spend my last 3 to 5 seconds slowly ramping down my pressure, at which point I would then act like I'm going to try and almost pull myself deeper into the stretch by tucking my tail underneath me, squeezing my hip forward to almost try and pry more length out of my quad. Another thing you can do is act like you're going to try and lift your heel or your back foot up and off the block. Many times though, you'll get such an aggressive contraction of your hamstring that you'll cramp, so be very cautious with that. I encourage more just tail tucking, seeing if you can get a little farther forward, just into a comfortable stretch and no back arch, and then you can go through a second cycle if you're starting to get used to these stretches. Initially, I would encourage you to just start with one cycle on something like this.